great to see you again. This time, an edition that is more specific to the region. So, Rupen, let's just get right into it because it's only 10 minutes, as you know. How do you, through your illustrious career, think about accelerating transformation? Like, for a lot of people that are on this, watching on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, I'm seeing the comments come in. They are in smaller businesses, entrepreneurial stuff. So it's always interesting for them to listen in on people driving bigger organizations because they don't deal with the politics or the lack of speed. The companies you're involved in have the resources, are bigger. Those are advantages, but it's hard to drive transformation because it's a big ship, and so I'd love to get a sense for the fellow C-suite Fortune 5000 individuals that are watching. Where do you kind of see that play?
So, Gary, transformation starts with accepting I don't know what I don't know. And what that gives rise is a lot of fear, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of blankness. Okay? And most large organizations are tremendously focused on a constant improvement of the current systems, the current management, the current status quo. And there is therefore a big imagination gap, which when combined with fear, which when combined with having the humility to accept that I don't know what I don't know, can be terrifying. And it reminds me of that famous George Bernard Shaw's quote, which was, some people see things as they are and ask why, and others dream that never were and ask why not. And very few organizations are able to ask why not, and then jump into it knowing that failure is almost certain.
Do you believe that that's because most organizations are driven by people who have less entrepreneurial spirit, are more comfortable drawing within the lines, are more risk adverse because they're rewarded to be risk adverse because that's just the truth of it?
Yeah. I mean, as an organization grows larger, your first need is to create systems, to control, to create order, to issue handbooks, to give people, do-it frameworks, who decides, who owns. And what we don't realize is what we are killing is creativity. What we are creating is an imagination gap. And therefore, companies, as they grow larger, are destined to be less creative unless there is a conscious effort to create a space for people to stumble. I mean, if you look at most of the large companies, they never started off, Gary, where they are today. I mean, 3M was a mining company.
100%.
30 billion plus today.
Most companies, when they get to that level of scale, would make the founders of those companies throw up all over. I'm starting to throw up all over myself on VaynerMedia. I'm currently running it. Yes. It's my company. And even at 1,500 people, I'm like, how many meetings do people have to have where there's 12 people in the meeting for an hour when it's really a 4-person meeting for 30 minutes, but everyone's got to be part of the meeting because they feel left out? I mean, I don't even like my own company, let alone what the company will look like in 35 years when it has 25,000 people.
No, there's a huge difference. Like, I call it the rocking horse phenomena at Dole, right? A lot of people within our system outside tend to sit on a rocking horse, go, whoa, look, mama, look, to realize that they're still in the same place.
100%.
And we need to differentiate between motion and progress. And a lot of organizations sometimes tend to confuse the two and continue to stay in the rocking horse. I mean, can you imagine going back to that 3M phenomena, being in mining, discovering sandpaper, discovering it doesn't work, to suddenly selling adhesives and paper and a sticker that didn't stick. I mean, and the list is endless. So sometimes I think we don't give enough merit to stumbling, fumbling.
Well, I mean, that's why little companies beat big companies. Like, there's a reason why David beats Goliath, because Goliath has lost its way. I mean, you want to hear something incredible, Rupin? Like, when I started VaynerMedia, I knew so little about Adland. I thought that VaynerMedia was going to get I made this up, which is, my first mistake. I thought big companies had 20% of their money allocated for innovation. I thought if you run Pepsi, Dole, Starbucks, that you have a budget and 80% is to run the business day to day, quarter to quarter, all the that I anticipated, and 20% was to build it for the future, and I was going to come in and crush that. Literally, it was a cold shower within the first couple of months. I'm like, wait a minute, 100% of the money is played over here, and oh, by the way, it's spent on that was relevant 10 years ago. So I thought I was going to be over here with 20%, and meanwhile, all the money's over here, and it literally, in 2009, believed print was more valuable than social. There's still organizations that kind of believe that.
But Gary, most leaders grow up perfecting a formula, and the fear of trying the unknown and failing miserably, particularly at a day and time when most organizations don't, no matter what they say about let's fail forward, let's embrace transformation.
Those are offsites. Those are offsites filled with for optics.
So unless we create, and it comes right from the top, it comes from the board, it's sweet, unless there is a genuine embrace of the fail, not know, let's be five blind people trying to define an elephant, call what you may call it, it is basically a bit of speak in a nice CEO conference, a bit of offside, but it's never genuine transformation. And there's another piece of transformation I want to talk about, because a lot of us talk to people, like a lot of us, about the issues we're having of why is my Wi-Fi not good enough? 70% of the world still probably needs to deal with hunger, sanitation.
Of course. It's all contextual. Something you're complaining about is a privilege somewhere else. And I think we have to be empathetic to that. And deploy that perspective, but it's just not the way, and it's definitely not the way of big companies.
No, and if we're talking transformation in the real world, I saw the work winning at Cannes, and I admired some of it, and I thought, wouldn't that amazing? We've solved the refugee problem. Everybody can now register on a offline phone. Great, well done. And then you go, yes, but that bubble lasted a week, maybe 2 weeks, maybe 5 weeks, I don't know. I'm not commenting on that piece of work, but I'm commenting on work like that in general. We've got to find those solutions that transform the world and make it a bit more equitable. We can't have the haves talking to the haves about the issue of the haves and call it transformation.
Audacity. I mean,
privilege.
But it starts with the fact of even thinking judging work for awards that are used for proxies to get business. Like, it's your statement there was meta. Like, sure, but like the context of even judging award shows for work that nobody really even sees, so that we can speak in an these normal people on the screen right now have no idea what the we're talking about when it comes to TV commercials.
No, everyone's wondering about how am I going to pay rent? What am I going to do?
Or let's not even go altruistic. Let's go marketing. Let's just do marketing. Let's not even go big. Let's go small. Marketing. We sit in rooms judging work, shaking each other's hands for big commercials, TV commercials, that none of these people right here even know what the we're talking about. True. Anyway, go, please. Last words.
We're fooling ourselves. And we're doing the worst damage we could to our business by doing that.
I couldn't agree more. That is my passion every day, knowing that we're in the industry but not of it.
Thanks for having me.
Yuan, what's more gangster, being a police officer or navigating the corporate marketing world?
I can tell you both are equally gangster here. The interesting thing about being a police officer when you're really young is it teaches you a lot about empathy, and those skills can go a long way, and that's what's really also quite important in the corporate world.
I agree. And for everybody who's watching, a little context of what's going on with Pep. Again, global audience watching, but my intuition is predominantly North America with the sprinkling of Europe and APAC and South America. What's the state of the union of the brand in that region? Is there any uniqueness for Blue Can or any of the regional brands? Just 1 minute on that, and then we'll get into how you think about accelerating transformation.
Sure, absolutely, Gary. So, as many of your audience would know, we are a global company with many well-loved brands, $23 billion brands, I think counting more than $250 million brands globally. So all those brands that you know from North America, Europe, whether it's Pepsi, Mountain Dew, Bubbly, Gatorade, Lay's, Doritos, they're all here in APAC. But we also have some really unique propositions here. For instance, our Australia business has a Red Rock Deli premium line of snacks, crackers. We've expanded into nuts and seeds as well. Recently, we've also taken the Quaker brand that you might know in North America as cereal into things like granola. We launched a new product, coffee granola and yogurt bite granola. So it's really exciting innovation happening in this space. And last year, we also acquired an online direct-to-consumer company that's the largest in China of its kind, selling all kinds of snacks from nuts and seeds to dried fruits to meat snacks. So we are diversifying the portfolio a lot. We're innovating to meet the needs of the local consumers. And it's a really exciting time to be part of PepsiCo and also to be part of APAC. I'm really glad that you decided to do a show here because, it's a really dynamic region of the world. And earlier we talked about, Rupen was talking about the burning platform, right?
Yes.
And there's three things that are common about APAC consumers and markets. I think it'd be one, the pace of change.
Yes.
Think about FMCG as being fast, but here in APAC, it's about 10 times the speed.
100%.
Consumers here embrace new ideas really quickly, and they often think digital and mobile first. And there's just so much optimism about growth potential. Those three things really force you to accelerate transformation because whether you're a big company like PepsiCo or a small company trying to make a mark in the world, you have to move quickly and you have to transform if you are stuck in an industry that is seeing a lot of impact from various forces.
What do you think? What do you think, from your perspective, Walmart included, with retail being that close? Transformation. Do you believe the big companies spend enough time actually understanding the consumer, or do you think they spend too much time within the confines of what their financial objective is?
That's a great question.
Thank you.
I would say, the common adage is if you don't pay for today, you can't have it tomorrow, right? So every company that's listed has to answer to investors, has to make sure that we deliver the returns. But I think that's the job of leadership, which is to make sure that you secure tomorrow, but you also build a new future for 25, 30 years out. And that's what we're doing at PepsiCo. It's not easy. There are short-term pressures. This year you see a lot of impact on commodity costs, for instance. But I'm excited about the approach that we're taking at PepsiCo. And if you think about how to run this sort of business, I really think about the organization as comprising different types of businesses. So you've got, startups within the company that are trying to manage and set up from 0 to 1. The kind of talent that you want in these roles may not be the kinds that are great moving a business from 95 to 100.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think you're making a huge point. I want to make sure everybody gets it. We only have a couple minutes. How much is casting a huge variable in the game that you play to actually create short-term success and viability and create transformation? I think you're touching on the most important. It's actually scary, in my opinion, how big of a deal casting is. You were just speaking to it. You agree?
Yeah, it's critically important because the way big corporations have thought about talent in the past is you're going to join this company and you're going to stay for 20 years and make a career out of it. I think in future, if we want to run new businesses, we want to get entrepreneurs to come in and become intrapreneurs. Then when you think about careers as people who come in and do missions for 3 to 5 years, they have a starting line and a finish line of what defines success. And after that, we should be happy for them to move on to other things. because they're excited by the new and not necessarily about, taking something from 1 to 10 or 10 to 100.
When you say new, do you think at the scale that you play at, new within your world, like let's send them to Europe to run Gatorade, or you mean new like screw it, people are going to be in and out of our global four walls every 3 to 5 years?
I mean new as in let's reserve a chunk of money where we can go and try really crazy stuff that
I see.
It's not under maybe even one of our brands. Let's go innovate against an area or invest in some startups that can collaborate with us to innovate in a space that we've never innovated in before. But that's still core to PepsiCo's consumer agenda, which is to drive more smiles and through sips and bites for consumers around the world.
What's been the most interesting transformation you've actually, well, we got 2 more minutes, you've been a part of? Like, what's in your entire career, whether you were a young buck or yesterday, what's like you saw it in your real own eyes and you couldn't even really believe it when you and the team were done with it?
Yeah, the most fascinating transformation taking place right now is actually e-commerce in China, right?
Okay.
And if you think about how the industry has evolved, it's really into its third phase now. In the first phase, it was, the Amazons of the world, Alibaba's, JP's delivering from warehouses. That business is struggling right now. You now have store-based fulfillment, the e-convenience folks like Instacart, etc., and that's really booming. But in China, you now have the third phase of e-commerce, which is really consumer-centric, content-based e-commerce. So when TikTok decides they want to sell to consumers too, it's a very different way of marketing. You need companies to think about the consumer in a very centric way rather than the channels and the platforms, and that's a big change. I can't say that any companies have mastered it, but if you look at what Walmart's doing in the US, they're also taking a lot of learnings from what's happening in China and APAC to the rest of the world. And I think that's paying dividends as well.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's where global companies have a huge advantage because there's so many things uniquely APAC and China driven that haven't hit other places yet. It's human driven and it's going to work everywhere else.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll give you another example from my old employers at McDonald's, right? Delivery is responsible for a huge part of the stock price over the last 10 years. But 10 years ago, the delivery business in this part of the world, in markets like Singapore, Korea, Taiwan, was really 30% of total sales. So it's, there are lots of trends that you can see happening here because of how the consumers really embrace new ideas, and it will start to hit the rest of the world.
Thanks for casting the spotlight on APAC.
My pleasure, and it's great to see you again. I really enjoyed some of our prior combos. Why don't before we get into transformation, I'm just genuinely curious, as someone who's responsible for tourism, what have you, and I'm going to make assumptions over the last 18 months, you've had some conversations with other people that are in charge of it for other parts of the world. You've all been in the same basket. How difficult were these 18 months? And more importantly, how are you thinking about, really accelerating, transforming to be prepared for the appetite or the different behaviors? When I think about Singapore, there's so much business travel that people then take into leisure. How many of those become Zoom meetings? Like, how are you prepping? Because I think what's really interesting is we're talking in theory or history with some of the guests here today. I think you're in the eye of the storm of thinking about how to accelerate transformation because you're going to have to deal with some sort of new reality and it's going to have to move on you quickly. So when I drop all of that, how do you synthesize that and what are some of the things that come to mind?
That's a really difficult and long question, Gary. Perhaps I can begin with 2 data points in talking about the state of play in terms of tourism in Singapore. It's been very hard. If you cast it and you look at it in terms of before and after. Before COVID, we had 4 years of blockbuster growth, and it was record-breaking growth. And post-COVID, our visitor arrivals dropped by 85%. So it has been an existential problem, right? And if you're thinking about another piece of statistic, which I was researching on to prep for this discussion, McKinsey Global did a survey in July 2020 on transformation among C-suites and senior managers. And this was a statistic that really jumped out at me. The share of digital-enabled products in company portfolios has accelerated by a shocking 7 years. In APAC, was 10 years. And this was in July last year. So the rate of change in Asia and in Singapore, we're in the heart of Asia, has been fast and brutal and harsh. So one of the key things about what we do at Singapore Tourism Board is it's really about how can we lead the industry and how can we help the industry, right? So the questions we've asked ourselves has been, we framed it in 3 time frames. In the short term, how can we rapidly, quickly just give aid to help businesses survive?
Yeah.
Zero business, zero tourists, right? And then in the midterm, we need to think about very quickly, what are the tools in place that we can help the industry grow at scale? We're talking about back-end transformation, we're talking about platforms. And that's the midterm question, and that's tough, right? Because that's about learning and changing ways of doing. And of course, that's the prep for the mid to long term, which you talked about briefly, which is about, when markets open, how can Singapore be distinctive? How can Singapore create an amazing experience so that we are a pull destination? So it's about helping them thrive. And how we've been thinking about it would be, there are 3 things I can talk about today. One would be really about the entire digital transformation, but transformation is not just digital. 2, really, we're in the business of experience creation. We're in the business of whether you come to Singapore for business or for leisure, I need to bring a little bit of pleasure, right? And fun to your experience. So it's about experience re-engineering. And the third bucket really is about, we are talking about transformation. We need to ask ourselves, yes, we need to be scrappy, we need to test fast. After that, we need to think very quickly about how to scale. And one of the ways at the organization that we've been thinking about scaling is through working with others, partnerships. Excuse me, you can interject in here.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Everybody, look over here, a bird. No, I'm just kidding. Keep going.
So, if you're thinking about digital transformation, really there are a couple of things that we were looking at. The question we asked ourselves was, how can we look at building systems, improving processes at scale to help the industry transform? Very luckily for us, these were things that we were thinking about, and some of them we've built, but the adoption rate perhaps was slow.
Sure.
With the business problem that was real, adoption was accelerated, which was good in a way, but unfortunate that we needed that problem to push people.
Don't you believe for big organizations that almost the only time? First of all, hold on. Is that that might be the coolest water I've seen. You've got lemon in there. What else is in? What's going on there?
Vitamin C. And this was actually made by a social enterprise in Singapore.
I love that.
It's to help people with autism, and they make beautiful crafted products.
Gorgeous. So, don't you believe large organizations really, unfortunately, only act during crisis? I don't think we can say across the board. Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. But when you look at kind of the last, your career, you've been in some big organizations. Big organizations like to talk about moving faster, but really only crisis gets them to really move at the speed of accelerating transformation of the ambition of, let's say, the individuals on this call, right? It seems that only when that happens, it blew my mind how many CMOs, only because of COVID, finally looked at what was going on TikTok, finally paid attention to their organic reach on LinkedIn, finally started to debate if production costs were way too crazy, because it's just the reality of how it is.
Gary, I think one of the things that's been a great change in the past, perhaps 5 to 7 years, has been that the talk and about building in, okay, it sounds like a truism, it sounds a bit trite, but I just want to touch on this a little bit about building a disruption in your company, right? In building perhaps a band of crazy people who think about, testing and learning and doing things that perhaps might not fit into the business objective for the time being. And I think that has been built into a lot of major big companies in the West I've seen, and definitely in APAC. And I think as the Singapore Tourism Board, what we have to do, given that we're the government with a slightly different role, so we've had to think about how do we then build this mentality in big companies and at the same time help small companies change. So a couple of things that we've done is we built systems, easy systems. One system that we built is small companies. You might not have content about Singapore. You might not have the latest information of Singapore. How can I help all these small companies in Singapore and around the world talk about Singapore consistently, imaginatively? So we built a back-end called the Tourism Information Hub. Through APIs, you can have the latest contents, latest visuals, latest information about the attractions we have. And the rate of adoption was difficult to get people to understand what it was. It was challenging to get people to adopt it. With COVID, the adoption rates have soared. Likewise, the other back-end that we've built is really about data. We built a data center, which we've opened up just prior to COVID, so that the industry are able to have data at scale, and they're able to make very data-led decisions about their customers. So
you're enabling.
Yes, we need to enable.
It's huge. It's exactly right.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Gary. Good to see you. How are you?
It's a pleasure. I'm really well. Thank you, my friend. Thanks for being on. Simon, when you think about this, and you've been executing, because I'm a fan from afar, what are the ingredients? What can we tell the young executives, the entrepreneurs, and definitely the senior executives at the scale that you're playing at? What has been the secret to getting something to actually accelerate at the speed that I'm noticing? And you've got so many products, so many objectives. Yeah. What's been at the forefront?
Well, I think it goes down to culture and casting. And I know you were talking earlier with one of the guests around casting, and I think it's incredibly valuable.
Yeah, great.
But if you start with culture, you need to set an environment where you're rewarding risk. You're making sure you're listening to everybody in the organization. And in many ways, you're reducing friction, right? So you're pushing accountability and responsibility down as far as possible.
Yes.
You're helping people understand that we're driving for opportunity, and it's not just about sort of keeping the engine moving, but finding the next thing. And then on the casting side,
Simon, real quick on that, I apologize. It inspired me to a follow up. One of the things I think about all the time is eliminating fear, which leads to speed. But I'm a crazy character, have a young, smaller company, and I watch my people who've been with me for 18 months, who've been given 37 data points of why they shouldn't, still have trepidation because of the culture of societal business. When I hear you talk, thinking about my realities and kind of the investments I've made and watched companies like Facebook and Twitter and Uber, I'm fortunate of what I've been able to see at this young of an age. It's fascinating how challenging that is, even when you in your heart have all those intents purely. People still, parents they grew up with, societal norms, a prior experience. Please.
I think this is even more accentuated in a place like APAC, where to societal norms, there's a lot of respect for hierarchy, there's a lot of respect for your elders, and so you have to push hard against it, right? So it's a fear, I think, that every senior exec from any big company has, is that you're going to get too slow and you're going to lose out on that opportunity. So I think a lot of this is about backing up your people, right? So you give them accountability, and when they make mistakes, you sort of, you celebrate the fact that they took that chance, and you make sure that they understand that you're going to be with them through the good times and the bad.
When did that happen for you in reverse in your career, early on, anecdotally, an actual
Yeah.
story, maybe give a shout out to somebody who did right by you? And
Yeah, it's interesting. One of my job before this was with American Express, and American Express is old, established company, really well run, but taking risks is a difficult thing.
Mm-hmm.
And at one point, I was running the Centurion card business in the United States, so black card business.
Yep.
And we were debating sort of major changes in pricing and in terms of the way the product is going to be organized and put out to customers. And Al Kelly, is now the CEO of Visa, but used to be a senior executive at Amex, really backed me up in a crucial situation where I was taking a big risk and it was going to have something that was going to have a material effect on the company and on the product, certainly. And just to see him do that and to back up somebody who was relatively junior at that time was so empowering, right? And so it's one of those things that I've looked to replicate.
Why do you think that happened?
Well, I think, I came to the table with the right data, the right information, but fundamentally, I think he had trust in the person, right? He had trust, and as a leader, he trusted that I was prepared and I was doing the right thing.
I love that. What do you think needs to be transformed most in big companies as you have this great purview?
Yeah, I think there are a couple things. One is you need to make sure you're thinking beyond what is happening within your company and not looking at the market or looking at consumers or your potential customers within just the lens of your existing product set. Because you're going to miss the new trends if you do that. And you need to continue to think and be expansive and understand like the trends that for years have been coming out of Asia that are now hitting the West. But, for a long time, a lot of companies in the West just didn't understand it because it was a whole different business model. So one thing is to be focused there. I think the second thing is to just, again, get to this point of having people in the organization that bring a variety of mindsets. Right? And this is where I get to casting, right? You need some oddballs. You need some people who will actually create some friction and add some really interesting perspectives to that conversation. It also helps quite a bit with diversity and inclusion, right? You get a whole diversity of opinions and backgrounds into the conversation.
How have you noticed the oddballs? And it's really funny for me because I think it's a very important combo because for me and my framework, the oddballs are the reverse from my perspective. Right? The people that play within the lines, those A students, those right? Because I know where you're going, and I think it's a very important, good point. What's been so interesting for me is I only lived in entrepreneurship, and then I came over the last 13 years in corporate, and for me, still to this day, the oddball, the thing that feels off to me is the 98% of people I interact with.
Yeah.
To me, it's Charlie Brown. It's like, I literally know every meeting how it's going to go because everyone's playing the same book.
Yeah.
How
you have to create a culture that allows entrepreneurs to be comfortable, at least a bit comfortable within that environment, right?
100%.
Right. If you cycle through sort of folks who are the grain in the system, but they just constantly leave because they're dissatisfied.
How do you get the non-oddballs in that scenario to appreciate what the oddball's doing? Because I laugh at the non-oddballs eye rolling at the oddball in a world where the non-oddballs don't realize they're playing the mundane and they're the commodity.
Yeah.
But
you set a culture. You have to set a culture, and we've talked about this for a while at Google. This whole concept of 10x thinking, right? So, and coming from my previous background, a 10x thinking will get you fired, right? But if you have that sort of sense of like, look, we need to be audacious. We need to take on these big challenges, and this person has some crazy ideas, but there's something here. So let's figure this out, and let's constructively sort of attack those ideas and build up to something that could be viable. I think that's one of the key things you have to do. But it starts from setting that culture.
How are you, Gary? Great to be here chatting about accelerated transformation. I think it's pretty apt when you think about that. We started the company, 8 months ago, launched the global brand, expanded it internationally, and then today chatting with the legendary you on marketing for the now. So it seems to be a pretty good time.
You're very sweet. Thank you for that. And by the way, the font on the brand is incredible.
Thank you.
I love it. It's the kind of that old school cartoon font. I love it. When you think about this, obviously having this great career, you're still extremely young in your journey, and then now being in this spot where you are, where it is moving fast.
Yeah.
This is different than some of the kind of other organizations. What have you siphoned in your first sniff in this role, in this organization, that you're like, oh, okay, this is what I've heard. What kind of, maybe whether it caught you off guard or not, let's frame it a different way. What was an observation early on of like, oh, I see why this is different? Anything stand out?
Absolutely. I think a lot. It was a very big, I came from a very kind of traditional FMCG background, very large companies, very large organizations, and then, dipped my feet into making chicken made from plants, which, is kind of insane, and decided to just kind of take this
but really not insane, right, Gene? Like, I'm sure this is what your decision. Like if I had to bet the farm on fungus based, like on all these alternatives, it's so obvious to me.
It is so obvious, and it's a huge market. It's super exciting. It's super fast paced, but I think at the core of what we're doing is ultimately this point on accelerated transformation, right? And I think that was very much the very big kind of epiphany that I had joining this, right? So we talk about, from a marketing perspective, we talk a lot about, how do we adopt a model that is very iterative, that you change, you pivot, you learn, you fail fast, and then you read the cultural signals, and then you adapt and succeed. But what I'm really seeing here at Tyndall is that we're taking that kind of marketing model of this kind of iterative approach and really pulling it across the entire business model, right? So obviously we're doing it in tech by bringing, chicken that's from basically the technologies from like the Stone Age and bringing it into modern day, but also iterating on top of that. Like, how do we make this thing tastier? How do we make it healthier? How do we make it, an even greater chicken experience? But fundamentally in the business model itself, we're actually, probably the best way to think about us is we are a tech company that's scaling food, right? So our business.
Why do you think that, or why is it?
Because
for the people that aren't aware of, why is it a tech company?
Yeah, so our business model is actually very simple. We only do 3 things. So number 1 is we build global brands. Number 2 is that we do research and development, really the IP, the design of the product itself. And the last thing is that we have really strong business networks. But that means that unlike a traditional food company, we don't own manufacturing lines. We don't own factories. We don't own trucks, delivery trucks, etc. But that means that we have the ability to scale exponentially very quickly, like a tech company does. But also secondly, that we have the opportunity to pivot, to change our strategy, to learn from, to fall fast into failures, and then therefore adapt and succeed very quickly, because we're not encumbered with things like, well, what's the MOQ at the factory, and do we need to rebuild a whole new unit? Right?
Do people question the fact that you call it chicken when it's not chicken, which is a little bit different than burger because it's not meat like how does that play out? Like how does, I see a lot of people in the comments kind of referencing that, like how does that play out?
No, I think so. It's an interesting topic. First of all, it is chicken, right? Because what is chicken? If you think about it, a chicken is, right now, it's a super archaic analog technology where you put soy and water into it, give it a few weeks, and then, you end up killing the processing unit just to eat it, essentially.
But so, is it an actual chicken, like the actual animal?
It is, absolutely. So Tyndall itself is, first of all, it's Plant-based chicken is really seen as the final frontier because it's actually a very difficult meat to essentially recreate, right? Because the taste profile, the texture that consumers really demand is one thing, and I think Tyndall's really hit that mark. It is incredibly delicious. But the other piece is really the versatility of this protein, right? It's the one protein that almost every country has its national dish, be it like grandma's chicken pot pie or like a fried chicken sandwich. So it needs to cook in many different cooking applications, many different kind of spices, marinades, etc. Unlike a beef burger that might just be, a bit of salt and pepper, and if you're lucky, a slice of cheese. But so being able to nail all 3 points on taste and texture and versatility is what's really, been what's very successful with Tyndall, and that's really the thing that we're really bringing to the market, right? So we're meeting.
And what about innovation on marketing? Like instead of just focusing on a product, just from a marketing standpoint, what are the exciting things that you're most excited about from a comms standpoint? Either channels or types of creative. How are you thinking about that?
Yeah, I think firstly, we've really adopted this approach that, you talk about a lot too, which is this kind of iterative approach, really kind of questioning, why are we planning a campaign that's going to land 3 years from, like 3 months from now when the world could be in a completely different state?
The old school brand building, brand positioning, it's just not fast enough for truth.
True, and I'm testament to that. I went through that school of marketing, and I went through that. I was kind of trained in that sense. And so I think going back to your point about accelerated transformation, what is the biggest thing I've learned is we didn't need a global pandemic to shake things up, to make us relevant. We shouldn't be planning campaigns for 6 months down the road, putting all our eggs in one basket and hoping that, the creative is right. Actually, we're thinking literally marketing for the now, marketing now, this hour, this afternoon, what are we putting out?
How much is the challenge of driving down the cost of creative that is still contextual to the platform? Do you find that to be such a big part of the equation for that?
Yeah, I think, so that's one of the reasons that we've really approached actually having an integrated agency, right? So rather than, working with agencies that have a very traditional model that are charging by the hour, etc., we really have an in-house suite. We have, videographers, we have editors, we have designers, etc., and that allows us to generate way more content. Some of it's fantastic, some of it's really bad, but at least we're able to.
You mean like life? And people like Gary, but some of it's bad. I'm like, you mean 98% of commercials? 99% of commercials are bad, and they were slow and expensive. So what's the point?
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's really embracing this fact that it's okay to fail. It's not okay not to try. And therefore having as much as possible out there to really see what is the consumer feedback, but also really thinking like a human being and not as a marketer and okay, these are my subjects that I'm going to try and, convince.
Sure.
It's what do I find funny? What do the people in my team find funny or interesting? And let's put that kind of content out there.
I love that. Thank you so much.
Hi, Gary. I'm just a bit concerned about the lightning show that's
happening. It's real. I might not make it, Polly.
Did you organise that?
I organized that, and I organized you putting up a painting of a chicken after that last conversation just to quantify that this is a chicken or not a chicken. So everything's working for you right now. The lightning, the chicken painting. I'm on fire here.
There's a lot of jokes we could make about that rooster, but we won't go there. Actually, it's not even the year of the rooster in Asia. Interestingly, though, you were born in, I was just checking, you know what year you were born in?
I was born in 1975.
No, I mean the Chinese year.
But I was like, damn it, a question I finally knew. No, I would love to know what year it was.
I'm going to tell you right now.
Please.
You might be shocked. Actually, we're in the year of the ox, and next year is the year of the tiger. You were born in 1975. You're the year of the rabbit.
That makes a ton of sense.
Let me tell you, rabbits are highly intelligent, social and affectionate. They also can be very bratty, but it takes a very special type of person to work with a rabbit.
Well, I many very special people, and that is the absolute truth. Paul,
Thanks for having me.
when you think about accelerating transformation from such a creative lens like you've had, what has been the biggest catalyst?
Look, I think the most important thing is when we sort of look at brands and talk about brands and what we need to do, because a lot of the big productions that Tim just mentioned that I've done, we've had to align ourselves very closely with brands to obviously make it financial sense. And I think the most important thing is that brands need to sort of identify, and we need to work with them to identify and then entertain audiences. And I think that's the way we should be looking through. That's the lens we should always be looking through, because at the end of the day, putting aside some of the platforms, we need to talk to people. We need to talk to different demographics and in different ways. And I think we also need to think about how we can be much more creative in doing so. Because without that lens, most content that we make, especially across Asia, won't resonate.
When did you first realize you wanted to storytell? I'm now just kind of going off script because I'm enjoying the energy. Like, when did you realize there was a creative bug inside of you?
I can't tell you exactly when, but it was at school. And so it started with music, it started with art, then it started with coming up with innovative ideas and then making short films, and it sort of progressed. And then straight out of school, getting into media at a time when you couldn't really go to university, that's how old I am, to learn to be a journalist effectively, you had to sort of like be creative in the ways that you worked. So, but I think what really catapulted it for me was when I left Australia 20 odd years ago and moved to Asia. When you could actually see from small markets right up to the biggest in India and Indonesia and China, that you can go local, you can go deep, but at the end of the day, it's all about entertainment, right? And I think that's the thing. There are the world's biggest shows, the Brands Got Talent, X Factor, Idol, all of those guys, make a lot of money. And Simon Cowell is a very, very, very clever and creative businessman. However, I think the next big opportunity, when we talk about sort of creativity, is looking at how we can take something from the east to the west. So instead of looking at ideas and IP, which has come out of Western countries and sold around Asia specifically, what can we do in this part of the world to actually then turn it around and say, okay, there's some incredible ideas in Asia. There's also some markets which may be small, but are full of fantastic creatives who can then come up with ideas that work for brands, that talk to the right people, that their audiences in a way which makes sense. And then look at how we can transfer that around the region and beyond.
I couldn't agree with you. I mean, to me, the biggest reason I have a global organization is the arbitrage of the context of then being able to take that and deploy a contextual to the other platforms.
Yeah, 100%. And I think now the transmedia storytelling model is the most incredible way that we can actually continually engage 24/7 with audiences, whether they're in a linear part of,
Because I think the thing you learn when you get some of the gray hairs that you and I have is some things are just incredibly universally human and other things are incredibly not. But, a lot of times people fight me on this and I say, did you ever think K-pop, have you watched K-pop bands perform in Alabama and watch the girls go crazy? You could have never sold me on that 20 years ago. Right. It's very clear where we are in the world, and it's a beautiful thing. I think it becomes more team human globally and has nuances of optimism over the next 500 years. Absolutely does. And I think that's the thing, that it transcends nationality, it transcends language. It's about entertainment and engagement. And I also think, gone are the days where you need to sit for an hour or an hour and a half to watch content. Let's look at TikTok. Let's look at 5-second episodes or whatever. But you know what's funny about that, Paul? I'm sorry to interject. I couldn't agree with you more, I also believe in the reverse. Maybe the most wonderful experience for me from content in the last 2 years was all 8 straight hours of Queen's Gambit. Incredible. To me, I believe in this. I think there's too much fascination on length. I think that I will stop watching a 6-second Vine 2 seconds in and I will sit through 8 hours binging on OTT and everything in between. They both work. I think what people have definitely recognized that we now consume more short form. What I don't think people have completely wrapped their head around yet is we are consuming long form at levels we've never thought before. As a kid, intuitively, creatively, as a storyteller, I always wondered why 4-hour movies didn't exist, because there was many after 2.5 that I was like, they should have made that 3.5, because I could see they truncated the story and they fucked it up because they decided we won't sit here. I'll sit for 10 hours in the theater watching a new Star Wars. And I think OTT binging has proven that. And I think that actually creates an incredible level of innovation and storytelling, because there's a lot of humans that are willing to go much longer than we've historically thought.
And I think that's the great thing about platforms now, that you don't have to sit to 46 minutes, which is a commercial hour on free-to-air TV. It can go for as long as the story holds, right? If it's entertaining and it's a strong story, you let it run. But I think also, and you just touched on that based on the fact that you and I have a few grey hairs, you more than I because mine's died, is the fact that I think we need to empower young people more and give them the tools that they need to actually tell the stories that they want to tell. And that was one of the most incredible things that I did in my career, which was working in Afghanistan and empowering young girls to give them a platform to be able to tell the stories of young women who didn't really have a way up until that point in time to be able to be heard. And I think, it doesn't take, and you touched on it earlier as well, we're not talking huge budgets on any of these things. Okay, the Queen's Gambit, bit different, but it's about an interesting story and how you tell it, not about what the budget is.
It's insane what this does.
Totally.
I'm not a camera lens, that's not my education, but I spend my time with many people that are. When some people explain to me the power of this camera compared to even 15 years ago, highest quality, the innovation is there. And now, what's incredible is truth is such a foundation of a great story, isn't it?
Definitely it is. And I think what we need to do is actually look at how we can tell those stories in ways which are going to engage people, which is what brands need.
I couldn't agree more. Paul, final thoughts. When you think about transformation, casting, a dictator up top who she or he pushes it, pain in the industry which leads to it, final thoughts on what actually leads to actually accelerated transformation?
I think what actually leads to it is making sure that we are listening to what people want and doing that in a way which is collaborative, creative and commercial. And I think you need to harness all of those elements together to push things forward. And again, earlier I agreed with everything you said when you talked about you do a 2-hour meeting, which could have been a 20-minute meeting with 100 people in the room instead of 10, and things just get dragged down.
Ego, insecurity, optics, politicking, peacocking.
Of course, though, you obviously do need to get people on board and engaged, but that's different. So anyway, I appreciate your time. I'm wrapping you up.
Thank you.
If you want to learn how to market on social media like Gary Vee, check out the video right there next to me. I think you'll enjoy it. Continue to believe, and I'll see you there.